Welcome to episode 175 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. It is April 24th, 1906, Athens, or more precisely, the Neophalliron, a football final at the Olympic Games, or more precisely, the games that the Olympic movement still cannot quite decide what to do with. The Danish side walks out for the final of the football tournament, the 1906 Athens Games, the so-called Intercalated Games. By half-time, they are 9-0 up against the hosts from Athens. Then the second half never happens. The Greek team simply doesn't come back out. Denmark are awarded the gold medals, and one of the strangest, least remembered, yet oddly influential football tournaments of the early international age comes to an end. To understand how we got here, you have to begin with the games themselves. The 1906 Athens event was staged at the 10th anniversary celebration of the first modern Olympic Games in 1896, and as the first experiment in what was supposed to be regular intermediate games in Athens between the main Olympiads. At the time, these games were treated as the real Olympic Games. Medals were awarded, nations took part. The Olympic movement badly needed a success after the model Paris 1900 and St. Louis 1904 editions, and Athens 1906 delivered exactly that. Later, though, the IOC changed its view. The 1906 Games were retroactively pushed out of official Olympic chronology. So the event both happened and institutionally half didn't happen. That ambiguity is not a side note, it's the whole atmosphere of the story. And football fitted that atmosphere perfectly. At the earliest Olympics, football was still feeling its way into international form. In 1900 in Paris, in 1904 in St. Louis, the winners were clubs or local representative teams rather than formal national selections. When FIFA, founded only in 1904, had not yet become the organizing force we later take for granted. FIFA's own historical line is that the first truly noteworthy international football tournament it helped organize was the 1908 Olympic competition in London. So in Athens in 1906, football sat in a kind of transition zone, already international in aspiration, still improvised in structure, not yet settled on the nation state as its default unit. That matters for Denmark, because the quote-unquote Denmark team that went to Athens was not a proper DBU national side in the later sense. DBU had no interest in the invitation. The Danish FA would not sanction its first official internationals until the 1908 Olympics. Instead, Carl Andersen, a teacher, organizer, and listed as the coach of the 1906 gold medal football team, assembled a side on private initiative, made up entirely by players from Copenhagen clubs. Only in 1908 did DBU accept the Olympic invitation and thereby launch official Danish international football. So the cleanest way to say this is this. Denmark were the closest thing to a national team in the 1906 tournament, but not yet Denmark in the fully official sense. And the field tells you how embryonic this all still was. 4 teams entered the football tournament, 1 from Denmark, 3 from what the sources describe as Greek cities, Athens, Thessaloniki, and Smyrna, though both Thessaloniki and Smyrna were still in the Ottoman Empire at the time. Smyrna's team was especially unusual, essentially a cosmopolitan city selection made up largely of English, French, and Armenian players. All the matches were played on the infield of the Neophalliron velodrome, with spectators watching from the cycling track's edge. This was football still borrowing other people's architecture. And the tournament was tiny. 2 semifinals on April 23rd. Denmark beat Smyrna 5-1. Athens beat Thessaloniki 5-0. That was it. No sprawling bracket, no deep field, no qualifying mythology. A pair of one-day eliminators, and then the final. Then came April 24. Denmark against Athens. And the final was barely a contest. Later summaries agree on the essential shape. The Danes led 9-0 at halftime. Athens did not appear for the second half, and were then disqualified. In essence, the final died at the break. And that led to another absurdity. Because once Athens had refused to continue, the organizers improvised and tried to reconfigure the tournament and staged a playoff for second place between Athens, Smyrna, and Thessaloniki. Athens refused again, protested that reaching the final should already entitle them to second place, lost the argument, and effectively removed themselves from the rest of the event. Smyrna then beat Thessaloniki 12-0 to take silver, with Thessaloniki then left with bronze. It was football in experimental mode, but also football as bureaucratic farce. So what did it all mean? Well, the 1906 football tournament exposed what early Olympic football still was: improvised, uneven, and not yet properly international in the modern sense. The teams were not national associations meeting on settled terms. They were Copenhagen-selected Danish 11, an Athens side, and two teams from Ottoman cities with mixed local identities. That is why FIFA and later historians draw such a sharp line in 1908. In London, official national teams appeared. DBU formally entered Denmark, and FIFA had a meaningful organizing role. In Athens, 2.5 years earlier, the sport was still rehearsing. Also, it seems to have mattered precisely because it was unsatisfactory. Athens 1906 worked well enough as a wider games to help rescue Olympic prestige, and some still credit the Intercalated Games with helping launch traditions such as the Athletes' Parade. But the football tournament showed the limits of half-formed structures. By 1908, the model was clearer, sharper, and more official. It would be staged in London, football's motherland in institutional terms, and Denmark, now properly under DBU and coached by Charles Williams, would treat it very differently. From no official DBU interest in 1906 to a complete shift by 1908, when Denmark played its first official internationals at the Olympics. And finally, the Danish angle matters in its own right. This 1906 side sits in a strange place in Denmark's football genealogy. It was not the official national team yet, but it was clearly the bridge towards one. It won gold in a tournament the IOC no longer counts officially, yet those medals were real to the men who received them. It came before DBU had fully embraced international selection, yet it showed what Danish football could be once it did. And that longer arc matters because within 2 years, Denmark were Olympic silver medalists in the first officially recognized tournament, and within a decade, they had become one of the most respected non-British football powers in the world. And maybe that is the best way to understand April 24, 1906. Not as a forgotten curiosity, not as a fake tournament, not even as a proper final in the modern sense, but as a hinge between club selections and national teams, between Olympic improvisation and Olympic structure, between a football world that was still assembling itself and one that, by 1908 and then the 1920s, would begin to look recognizably modern. Before we go, 3 things to take away from April 24, 1906. First, the Athens 1906 Games were real enough to award medals and shape Olympic tradition, but later stripped of official status by the IOC, which is why they remain both historical fact and institutional argument. Second, the football tournament was still pre-modern in structure. Denmark were the strongest side there, but not yet an official DBU national team, while their opponents were city or club-based selections. Third, the final mattered less for its football than for what it revealed. A 9-0 halftime score and a Greek refusal to continue exposed how badly the sport still needed firmer organization, something 1908 would begin to provide. On this day, 1906, Danish 11 won the football final at the Athens Intercalated Games after leading the hosts 9-0 at halftime, a bizarre, half-finished title match that helped mark the end of football's Olympic improvisation and the beginning of something far more formal. That's all for episode 175 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. If you enjoyed this episode, you can be assured of getting the next one by hitting subscribe. And how about rating the show 5 stars? Not 5 stars, don't bother. Please share it with all your friends. It helps the show climb the charts. Tomorrow, go to April 25, 1949, and it's the beginning of El Dorado in Colombia. See you then.